Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this special edition of The Hill with April Ryan. It's been a busy start to the new year, with lots of changes on Capitol Hill and throughout the country. Part of that change is new leadership and some historic wins. Tonight, I want to share with you my special interview with two of those history makers, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Maryland Governor Wes Moore. We'll start with Brooklyn's finest, Brooklyn Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, the first black person to ever lead a congressional party in U.S. history. I sat down with the congressman to talk about his new role, making history, and his plans for the new Congress. It is so wonderful to be with you in this moment, in this room. You are history walking. You are history speaking. You are the first black Democratic minority leader, the first black minority leader in history. You are that splash of color that no one ever thought would happen. Talk to me about that.
Well, April, it's great to see you, and thank you for sitting down to have this discussion. You know, I think fundamentally America is premised on the notion of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And while our democracy is still a work in progress, the fact that I have this opportunity to serve in this position, someone who was born in Brooklyn Hospital, grew up in a working class neighborhood in Crown Heights, raised by my parents in the Union household, started off in the Cornerstone Baptist Church, you know, raised in the Cradle Roll department, made it, you know, through high school, survived the violence of the crack cocaine epidemic, and somehow landed in the United States Congress and now have the opportunity to serve in this position. That is democracy in action. And while the framers didn't create a perfect country, they did promise a march toward a more perfect union. And in this position, I'm just going to try to do everything that I can to work hard, never give up, stay focused, deliver results, so that while I may be the first African American to serve in this position, what's most important is that I not be the last.
So, Congressman Jeffries, you talked about a march towards justice. We're in a room that is history all into itself. This room was once held by Kevin McCarthy, before that Nancy Pelosi, now you. But in between all of these people coming through here, there was a march through here. And now you. There is a polar opposite dynamic in this nation. And race and hate are a part of that. Let's talk about that march moving forward in this 118th Congress in the midst of all of the marching against a move towards equality, justice, and everyone.
Well, there are people in this country, people in this Congress who want to undermine some bedrock principles of our country: equal protection under the law, liberty and justice for all, free and fair elections. And we have an obligation in the House. I think our colleagues and partners in the Senate, certainly President Biden, will continue to defend democracy, an inclusive, multiracial democracy where those promises of equal protection under the law and liberty and justice for all apply to everyone, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of zip code or station in life. That is part of our march toward a more perfect union. And as we've seen across the country, particularly given the rise of hatred and xenophobia, the radicalization of so many people as a result of the poison that was spread by the former twice impeached President of the United States of America, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and I'm committed to doing it. Hopefully, we can continue to find partners on the other side of the aisle to find common ground, work together whenever and wherever possible in the best interests of the American people.
In the midst of all of this, you are serving the American people. But in particular, there is a call from Black America, the millions of Black Americans who are asking for voting rights. We are now, as Black people, not as free as we once were when we had all of our rights. Voting rights is now off the table. And then there's a thing called policing, police reform. Could you talk to me about those two issues and trying to find allies to make these two items that have been elusive to passage a fact and law?
Those are two incredibly important issues, and I would add a third into this basket. You've got criminal justice reform, you've got the protection of voting rights, as you indicated, and then you have police reform. On criminal justice reform, the good news is there's still a strong bipartisan pathway to build upon work that has previously done, including passage of the First Step Act, which was bipartisan in nature, signed into law by the previous president, brought together Democrats and Republicans, progressives and conservatives, the left and the right, the NAACP and the Koch brothers, the ACLU and the Heritage Foundation, Al Sharpton and Grover Norquist, and all points in between. On criminal justice reform, to break the back of the prison industrial complex, which we know disproportionately and adversely has impacted communities of color, and in particular, Black men. And as a result of the First Step Act, 90% of the more than 10,000 people who have been released are back into society, working as productive citizens, successful stories of reinvigoration. 90% of those individuals who have been released are Black men. And so this is a positive step forward.
Stay tuned for more of my sit-down interview with Congressman Jeffries.
Welcome to theGrio, bringing you the stories that move us.
From culture, news, and politics, these are stories told in a way that is meaningful and important for everyone.
From the clean water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi, abortion rights, mental health, and celebrity scoops.
We'll be here every day to keep you on top of what's happening in the world as we know it. theGrio, stories powered by us.
Watch our shows live every weeknight on theGrio cable. Check your local listings.
How can you bring this back into being the 1965 Voting Rights Act? The Supreme Court gutted it twice. What can be done in this 118th Congress, or is it just an effort just for people to rise up in each state to try to change the dynamic in the state?
Well, it is important to go state by state. Back home in New York, the legislature passed the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York to make sure that this effort at systematic voter suppression cannot take hold in our state. So I do think it's important for different states to look at opportunities currently that may exist where they can move legislation, but we cannot give up on the federal effort. We have to find a way to pass the John Robert Lewis Freedom to Vote Act. Build upon the incredible work that was done that had been bipartisan in the past around the original 1965 Voting Rights Act. As you know, April, the Voting Rights Act had been signed into law, reauthorized on 4 different occasions after its initial passage.
Republican President George W. Bush is one of the last ones to reauthorize it.
Absolutely right. 4 different occasions, 1970, 1975, 1982, 2006. And on all 4 occasions, to your point, when the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized, 1970, Richard Nixon, 1975, Gerald Ford, 1982, Ronald Reagan, of all people, 2006, George Bush. All 4 occasions signed into law by Republican presidents. So what happened? What was the change? Why all of a sudden did Republicans on the other side of the aisle try to weaponize voter suppression? Was it the election in 2008? What happened to cause this change? And then the Supreme Court leaning in aggressively to try to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. So our democracy is under attack in a variety of ways. Voter suppression and the epidemic of it is one of those ways. And so we're not going to give up. I had the opportunity to serve with John Lewis. It was one of the greatest honors of my life. And during difficult times, you know, as a young boy, the boy from Troy, as Dr. King would call John Lewis, he saw wrong in society And there were a whole lot of folks who probably believed that nothing in the Deep South could ever change. This is John Lewis in Alabama.
Troy, Alabama, yeah.
Troy, Alabama, an oppressive environment. Yeah. But he and so many others like Rosa Parks and Fannie Lou Hamer and Dr. King saw the possibility of change notwithstanding the obstacles. And if they never gave up, if they got into good trouble, if they bent the arc of justice, with all of the tools that are at our disposal right now, we've got to be willing to lean in and do the same.
You regaled us just now about the history of Dr. King, but you come from a lineage, political lineage in Brooklyn, sneaker-wearing Brooklyn, of some greats who changed the dynamic. I'm going to go as far back as Shirley Chisholm, who ran for president in 1972, saying, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And this woman black woman who dared the odds, who was a feminist, said, okay, I'm leaving my seat, but I want a black man to take the seat, who happened to be Ed Towns, who was the first black man to be the head of oversight and reform here in the House. And then came a brother named Hakeem Jeffries, a Kappa, who dared to be different and embraced his authenticity. He gets in the Well of the House and speaks Biggie Smalls, okay? He talks about wearing his slim-fitting suit, and if they were gonna come for us on January 6th, you were ready. This moment for you is set behind all of this from Brooklyn. Talk to me about the shoes you fill, those two greats and this moment, because each one carried their banner for Brooklyn and this country and the world even.
Yeah, it's been an honor to stand on the shoulders of Congressman Ed Towns, to succeed him in office after he served our community incredibly well for 30 years. And as you pointed out, Congressman Towns broke barriers here in Washington, D.C., becoming the first African American to chair the powerful Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. He knocked that door down. And once he knocked that door down, guess who else came through it? The great Elijah Cummings, who succeeded him eventually as chair, did great work, of course represented your native Baltimore and Charm City with incredible strength, dignity, and passion.
I love how Brooklyn recognizes Baltimore, but that's
right.
That's
the connection.
That's another
Brooklyn-Baltimore connection again. And then, of course, myself and Yvette Clarke, Major Owens, Ed Towns, the four of us who have had the honor of serving in Congress in Brooklyn, all stand on the powerful shoulders of the late, great Shirley Chisholm.
Stay tuned for more of my sit-down interview with Congressman Jeffries. You were on that committee many years ago when the Super Bowl happened with Janet Jackson and the, what was it, the malfunction, the wardrobe malfunction.
Right.
The wardrobe malfunction. Yeah, you were there. And you've been a part of your community in Brooklyn, you've been a part of Washington. And tell me about those who are like, wow, how did you get here? Because the younger generation thinks it's all bling bling right now. You have worked for this, you have toiled for this, you have served. It's not just I'm here, I'm rising. You have served. Talk to me about that.
The thing that I love the most, amongst many things, about the House is that as an institution, we are the part of government that the framers decided should be the closest to the people, to represent the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations, the fears, the concerns, the anxieties, and the passions of the people, and authentically channel that here in Washington, D.C. The best representatives come to Washington and are themselves authentic to the communities that sent them to serve in the House of Representatives. So I've tried my best to be that way, because that's the vision of what the House is supposed to represent. It's the reason why, as you know, April, in the House you only got 2-year terms, as opposed to the presidency, 4-year terms, the Senate, 6-year terms, and of course the Supreme Court, life tenure. Because the framers wanted people who serve in the House to stay close to the communities that you represent. Now, they probably never imagined someone like myself serving in the House of Representatives, let alone being in a position like this right now, but that is part of the journey of America.
You are so authentic and you're so close to the people. You went viral, and you know you did. When you took that gavel, you went from A to Z, and you also quote Biggie. So I want you to roll a verse right now. Give me a verse. Throw something at me.
You never thought that hip hop would take it this far.
Where else? Come on. No, well, go ahead.
I will say, you know, I mean, I do think that you know, America's a great country. We've come a long way through the trials and tribulations, but we still have a long way to go. And, you know, the notorious B.I.G., of course, I quote him frequently.
Yeah, you do.
And it was an honor to be able to do so on the floor of the House of Representatives, just to mark the moment of the 20th anniversary of his passing. But when I made the decision to do it, I did it because I thought that, hey, this is just a continuation of authentic representation.
Certain American icons in music have received recognition, congressional recognition, but you were looking for something for Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious B.I.G.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think the House is all about just channeling in every possible way, of course, with a primary focus on fighting to make life better for the everyday Americans that you represent. And that's what we'll continue to do. You know, fighting for lower costs and better paying jobs and safer communities and defending democracy, fighting for reproductive freedom, protecting the public interests, and doing what is necessary to ensure that things like voting rights are protected. That's our solemn and our sacred and our serious mission. But at the same time, we should reflect the culture of the people that we are privileged to serve. And in that regard, hip-hop culture was an incredibly important part of my life, my journey, my traveling through young adulthood into the person that, you know, my mother and father raised me to be at this particular point in time. And so that's also something that I will continue to give life to as a representative, not run away from it. And the reality is, when I made the decision that I was going to acknowledge, honor, tribute the Notorious B.I.G. to mark the 20th anniversary of his passing, before going to the floor, I had my team affirm for me what I knew to be the case, which is that other musicians, other icons in the entertainment space, like Elvis Presley, or Frank Sinatra, or Bruce Springsteen, had received multiple tributes on the House floor. So why shouldn't Christopher Wallace?
You're watching theGrio. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on this special edition of The Hill with April Ryan. Tonight, in 2 exclusive interviews, theGrio presents to you the next generation of 2 Black change agents. In my next interview, I talked to Maryland Governor Wes Moore. Moore made history by becoming the state's first Black governor, and he is the 3rd Black person to ever be elected as governor in the United States. I had the pleasure of speaking with Governor Moore and his wife about the new role, family, and patriotism. History is being made, period. The history books will now say that Maryland has its first Black first couple leading the state.
It is such an honor and a privilege to be in this position. The election of my husband was absolutely historic, and Marylanders spoke out about the things that were important to him. He ran on a leave no one behind agenda. And as I always said on the trail, my husband is a promise keeper. And there's no doubt that Wes, as a leader, as an empathetic leader, is ready for the moment. And while history is absolutely being made, as he always says, it's not the assignment. People wanted change, and they wanted to feel a part of such an important process, and that's only great for Maryland. So I'm very excited about this moment, and thankful to the voters of Maryland for selecting my husband and his running mate to be the next leaders of this state.
It's not just about change, it's hope. On the campaign trail, I never saw down faces, I saw smiles, energy. Even when your voice wavered, you were still moving. And I see that in people in moments of despair and distress and dis-ease. What is the dis-ease that you're trying to bridge in these next few years?
I think the thing that we saw all throughout the campaign trail over these past years is there is a feeling of uncertainty that people have. There is the lack of stability, the lack of an understanding about what these next days and months and years are going to bring, because it just feels like for a lot of people the only stability is instability that they continue to feel inside of their lives. And I think that what they were looking for is a clear vision and a path as to what it is that we were looking for and what it was looking to do, concrete things, right? So when we said at the beginning of the campaign trail, this is about economics, right? It's about work, wages, and wealth. How are you creating pathways to all three of those things for all Marylanders, and not just some? And how are we making an argument and showing people that the only way for this state to win is if we all win?
Yes.
If we're having a unified conversation and not a conversation where, you know, we're accepting these false choices that we continue to be given about who can succeed and who can't. In order for this group to win, it means this group must lose. These are false choices that have been fed to us by people who continue to win.
I want to put a pin in the economics because that is something that is so large. It has loomed large for decades, even hundreds of years, for certain communities in this nation. But I want to go to something, hope and change. In this moment for the nation is inundated with investigations. The Democratic Party was very hopeful at the beginning of this 118th Congress, and that's changed. Your inauguration will be the bright spot for Democrats. There's a heavy weight on you right now as everyone is like, oh, woe is me in this moment. Do you feel that? Because you are actually the bright spot. You were the bright spot in the midterm election, and now you're going to be the governor of the state of Maryland, the first black governor of the state of Maryland, the third black elected governor in this nation. And just like Georgia, that song, we had Georgia on our mind for about a year, but we also sang, oh, Maryland, right?
Yes.
And that's about you. So is there a weight on you in the midst of all of this quagmire, these albatrosses that are around every party's neck? Is there a weight on you right now?
I think the optimism wasn't about me. I think the optimism was about us, about the fact that I think Maryland is ready to move in a different space and is ready to shed this weight that the politics of negativity and divisiveness has continued to allow all of us to try to bear. And I think about it where, you know, I'm very humbled that the history, there was some other history that was made on election night, and that history was we received more individual votes than anybody who's ever run for the office of governor in the history of the state of Maryland, right? Ever. We ended up winning by the largest margin in the state of Maryland in 40 years in a governor's race. And the thing that's really inspiring for me on that is that's not just because black folks vote for us. It's not just because Democrats vote for us, because the truth is, you don't get to the numbers we got to with one group. We ended up winning amongst veterans and veteran households, which Democrats never do. We ended up winning for people who said that crime was their #1 issue, and people that said that economics was the #1 issue. We won in Western Maryland, we won the Eastern Shore, 16 of the 24 jurisdictions in the state of Maryland, we got the highest vote total ever of a Democratic candidate. And the thing that's really inspiring to me and to us in this moment is that there is a unified, concerted belief that if we stand divided, we can't win. But if we stand united, we can't lose. That this is going to be Maryland's time. But it means we've got to be able to bring about a leave no one behind agenda, something I learned when I was in the military, 17 years old, leave no one behind. If we can take that type of philosophy and take that idea, that's the thing I think Marylanders rallied around.
Stay tuned for more of my sit-down interview with Governor Wes Moore. You're watching theGrio. Governor Wes Moore. Look at you smile.
It's well, you know the thing it's so humbling to think about that, especially when you consider not just the journey of this campaign, it's the journey of this state.
Yes.
It's the fact that I think about Government House, the place where we're going to be moving to. Since 1870. Every governor of Maryland and their families have lived in Government House. And just a few weeks back, the current governor, Governor Hogan, and the First Lady gave myself and my family a tour of Government House. And I remember going back and talking to Dawn later on that night and saying, we have an 11-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. And watching these two little black children running around the house, picking out which room was going to be theirs. This journey has been so improbable, but I think that the thing that really is just so heartening about the whole thing is that all the people who put in the work to make this journey real. So it's like, when people, the expression of "I can see higher because I stand on the shoulders," there is no doubt that I can see higher. I can now see from this perch because there's a whole lot of shoulders who are sitting there and keeping my feet firm.
As you talk about keeping your feet firm, we cannot omit what you went through during the campaigning. You were against someone who was of a total different ideology. Someone who had the support of Donald Trump. This nation is now divided. It's not just the Republican Party in fractures, but Republican against Democrat. How do you plan to unite this state that is a microcosm of the larger community, the largeness of the country that's trying to find its way, that's still going through growing pains politically?
I plan on really attacking that by attacking it head on. You aren't going to lecture me on patriotism.
82nd Airborne.
That's it. My definition of patriotism was when I left my family and I deployed to Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division and risked my life for this country. And you're not going to lecture me on that. You're not going to lecture me on patriotism when I know I was raised by patriots, because I was raised by teachers. I was raised by ministers. Right? My family is operating engineers. My family are people who built this country with their hands. You're not going to lecture me on patriotism. And I think it becomes incredibly important that we do not allow an individual or a party to bastardize this term. If you talk about people who love this country, how about the people who have sacrificed and bled to make this country better, knowing how much work the country had to do to get better, particularly because some of its most divisive and oppressive impacts were impacting you, right? That's patriotism. Patriotism is not working to destroy democracy. Patriotism is not saying that you love the country, but you hate half of the people in it. So this is something that, you know, we took a very aggressive approach to it on the campaign trail. And I think part of the reason that we ended up having such a resounding victory is if you make the argument, you can win the argument, but you gotta make the argument. And you cannot allow that just to be subsided.
Patriotism is one of the sticking points of the divide between Republicans and Democrats. It's one. I'm going back to the economy.
Yes.
That's a big piece. And I think about a conversation I had with former Virginia Governor Doug Wilder. Former Virginia Governor Doug Wilder, black man. How about that? You
First.
are in, yes,
First.
You are now in that very small fraternity, right? He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said something to the effect that when people are hurting economically, that's when racism begins to bubble to the surface. When people feel like someone's taking from them when they're already struggling. Let's put a face on that in the state of Maryland. Black and white, Jew, Gentile, Protestant, and Catholic. There's so many different groups that are feeling the pinch. Maryland has great highs economically and great lows. Where do we bridge that gap? How do we bridge that gap?
I think it becomes really important that we also are honest with people about what the data is showing on this. You know, part of the reason that we are unapologetic about saying things like Maryland is going to close the racial wealth gap. And people say, you know, you should be careful about talking about that as a black candidate, that you're going to seem like you're, you know, talking about zero-sum politics. And I said, no, the current system is zero-sum politics. Because the truth is Maryland has an 8-to-1 racial wealth gap. Mm-hmm. But the reason why I talk about that on the campaign trail is not just because I'm speaking to African Americans. You know, the racial wealth gap in this country has cost this country $16 trillion in GDP over the past 2 decades. That's not GDP of a group. That's GDP. Lost product, lost production, because of a racial wealth gap that we're not willing to confront. And so it is all about economics. I think the thing we want people to understand is if you truly want to have sustainable economic mobility, you've got to make sure that the sustainable economic mobility is shared. Because if you have a consistent and a permanent underclass, you're never going to be able to have the kind of economic growth that you're hoping for. If you want to help yourself, help others. And so when we talk about economic growth, I'm not saying it to be selfless. I'm saying it because if you really want to have economic growth, be selfish and talk about what does it mean to actually share that pie and grow yourself into greater prosperity.
Stay tuned for more of my sit-down interview with Governor Wes Moore. You're watching theGrio.
Watch our shows live every weeknight on theGrio cable. Check your local listings.
It's been such a wonderful time to spend with you on the eve of your governorship. I've known you for a bit.
Right.
And I'm proud of you as a person. As a black person, I'm over the moon. My humanity sees this. In 2023, I see this. But as a journalist, I'm going to be journaling the history. Trust that, Governor Wes Moore. But with that said, I can't help but think of some of the heroes, superheroes in this state, like former Congressman Elijah Cummings, late Congressman Elijah Cummings. And we're talking about the economics of it all. And I think about when he was congressperson, and he said that a lot of corporations could not come or would not come to Baltimore because they felt that the field was unhireable. You have dealt with poverty, you have dealt with issues of economics. How will you change that dynamic?
I want people to understand how incredibly asset-rich this place is. The challenge is we're asset-rich and we're strategy poor. Because if you look at the assets of the state of Maryland, the assets in Baltimore, we have some of the best assets around. We're literally talking about a place in a city, just a city, that has 2 of the top HBCUs in America. We've got the Port of Baltimore, one of the most productive ports. We've got Johns Hopkins University and other amazing institutions, 2-year colleges, and the most remarkable asset is the people. That's Baltimore. And it's also really important that the state understands that you cannot have a thriving Maryland if you do not have a thriving Baltimore. It is the state's largest city.
Yeah.
And so our ability to be able to support the city, our ability to be able to have a thriving Baltimore is only going to mean that the state of Maryland is going to grow. And I tell people, I don't say that because I'm emotional about it. I say that because I'm good at math. You know, if you look at what's happened over in Detroit over the past 12 years, Detroit's growth has been one of the key reasons that you had Michigan growth. If you look at Atlanta over the past 30 years, Atlanta went from being a small, commuter town to now rivaling Hollywood in terms of film productions. Do you know the main beneficiary of that has been Georgia? So we have to have a thriving Baltimore if you're going to have a thriving Maryland.
And lastly, there are so many parallels between you and former President Barack Obama. The only thing is, you are now a politician, and he was a politician moving into the White House, but he also used a historic Bible for his inauguration, Dr. King's Bible. But in my hand, I am blessed and honored to have the Bible that you were using when you give the oath as governor of the state of Maryland. It's your grandfather's Bible. Tell me about this Bible.
So my grandfather was actually the first one on my mom's side of the family born in this country. And his father, my great-grandfather, was a minister, and he was a vocal minister. He was one of these ministers that didn't just teach the Word of God, but reminded people on earth they need to live a certain way. And eventually he started getting threats, and it was the Ku Klux Klan that ran them out, where in the middle of the night, he picked up his family, to include his toddler son, my grandfather, and they left this country. They went back to Jamaica. And much of my family said that they would never come back to this country. But my grandfather did, because my grandfather, in all of his humility, he said, this country will be incomplete without me. So he came back, he went to an HBCU, and he became a minister just like his father, except he became the first black minister in the history of the Dutch Reformed Church. So my grandfather was actually the first trailblazer in our family. The reason why this Bible means so much to me, and you can see, I mean, this thing is held together by tape.
Held together by tape and notes inside.
Notes.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, old sermons.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I always say this Bible is a workbook. This is a workbook. It has notes in the margin. It has comments. It has questions. He literally has questions about he wonders what X means or what Y means. And I love this Bible. And I'm so proud that, this is a Bible that I not only use, but I'll get sworn in on this Bible. And the reason it's so powerful to me is because this allows me a gauge into his mind.
Stay tuned for more of my sit-down interview with Governor Wes Moore. You're watching theGrio. When the leader is in office, typically the wife, the First Lady, supports her husband and the community with projects and with service. And when women support their husbands, or when they're involved in politics, it's about love and uplift of a community. What are some of your projects that you want to focus in these years in the governor's house?
Thank you. Well, I will say this. I am very focused on getting to January 18th. We have so many wonderful things going on, from a day of service to a faith concert to his swearing in to the People's Gala. And so that obviously in itself is a big focus of mine. We are also moving to a new home.
Yes.
And we have young children. And so I will certainly be focused on transitioning our family. And anyone who has moved a house knows it's a lot of work to get that done. But I fully support, obviously, the Leave No One Behind agenda. And when I select the things that I want to work on in relationship and in partnership with Marylanders. Of course, I care about many things, the arts, food deserts, workforce development, but I want to have the opportunity as the First Lady to listen and learn what's most important to Marylanders. I have some good ideas, but we are here to serve. And so I'll take my time to make that decision, but I'm definitely looking forward to it.
And my last question to you, he's magnificent.
Yes.
Yeah, I've known him for a while. Did you ever imagine when you were dating this young man that he would take you on this journey, I mean, around the world, and then to the governor's house and maybe beyond?
You know, I don't know what I really imagined, I'll be honest with you. But I will tell you this, when we got married, we wrote our own vows. And he said to me, I promise to keep this fun and exciting. And he never lied.
All right. Well, I'm sure it's going to be fun and exciting because there is such effervescence with both of you. And to see you to continue to churn it out and keep a smile and keep hope, that was a lot. And you are not a politician, and now you are. That was a lot, because the test of a politician is the stamina during a campaign. And both of you were smiling because you saw what the end could be.
And I got to tell you, it's not just that I couldn't have done this without her in practical terms, because if she said, we ain't doing this, we wouldn't have done it, right? So that's the ultimate veto power. But I couldn't have done it without her. Every single day, and you know, and there's something that I'll never forget with her is that, you know, all during ups and downs and all the difficulty, you know, she was always there. And I remember we started this thing at 1%. Literally polling at 1%. You know, I laugh, say, I'm not voting was polling higher than where I was polling at. And I don't know where things started changing. We started ticking up. We started ticking up. We started ticking up, and all the other people started either staying flat or ticking down, ticking down, ticking down. And then the silliness of politics began, right? Just the negativity and the lies and all this kind of stuff that comes into it. And I remember one day on one of these times, I'm like, why in the world? You're thinking to yourself, why do we put ourselves even through this foolishness? And we're in our room, and she puts her hands on my face, and she says, they're doing this because you're going to win. Keep going. I couldn't have done this without her. And I know with every single journey, with every single step, not only am I loving the way that the state is just completely falling in love with their new First Lady, it's actually really beautiful to watch. It just serves as an important reminder that in everything that we do and with every step we make, if you do it right, the reason that you keep moving forward is because you're not moving forward alone. And if you never forget who it is that you are fighting for, you'll never stop fighting. And that's why we're doing the work.
What a great evening. But I want to take this time to thank you for joining me for this special presentation of The Hill with April Ryan. For new episodes each week, be sure to check out theGrio.com, our YouTube channel, or download theGrio's free mobile app. Have a good evening. Peace.